All right, thank you. Let me share my screen here. All right, are you able to see the presentation?
Yep, that looks good.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Today's Urban Nonpoint Source and Stormwater Planning Grant Program webinar. Because that's such a long name, I am going to either call it Urban Planning Grant or Planning Grant for the rest of the presentation. So I'm going to cover the application cycle for the calendar year 2024 grant awards. And I'm Joanna Griffin. I'm the Runoff Management Grants Program Coordinator at the Wisconsin DNR. So the agenda for today's webinar includes resources for grants. Then I will give an overview of the Urban Planning Grant Program, application information and requirements, and then anything that's new from this last cycle. Our Urban Grant website can be found by going to the main DNR website and typing UNPS in the search bar. Here you'll find tabs with information, applications, important forms, and relevant laws. The Urban Nonpoint Source Planning Grant Program exists under the authority established in Statute 281.66 and Chapter NR 155. NR 154 identifies best management practices, technical standards, and cost share conditions that apply to grantees and cost share recipients when serving to provide or receive cost share funds under NR 155. And then NR 151 establishes runoff pollution performance standards for non-agricultural facilities and transportation facilities, and performance standards and prohibitions for agricultural facilities and practices designed to achieve water quality standards. Here is a map of all of the DNR regional urban grant contacts. So I'm the statewide coordinator, but the staff here are your main contacts for specific projects and grants in your counties. And we do have one vacancy at the moment in the gray counties. And Erin Hansen, who is in the kind of pinkish counties, is covering those gray counties as well. So as I mentioned, I am the grants coordinator. I work on all of the following: grant eligibility, applications forms, instructions, intake, scoring, ranking, and allocations. The regional non-point source coordinators, the map I showed you on the previous slide, are really the specific grant managers for grants in your counties. They work on grant eligibility. They are also there for the pre-application discussion, which is a requirement for our grant applications. They help with screening, and they manage the grant implementation as well as final reports and reimbursements. Corrine Johnson is our grants manager, and Corrine and I work very closely together, working together on all issues, such as eligibility. However, Corrine's focus is on the grants after or for the award and after they've been awarded. So amendments and reimbursements and the financial piece of an administration of those grants. And then we have Molly Richardson, who is the BITS Data Systems Coordinator, which stands for, BITS stands for BMP Implementation Tracking System. And this is where the final reports will go for these planning grants. That section hasn't been built yet, but we are in the process of developing it. So eventually the final reports for our planning grants will be entered into BITS. And Molly coordinates the development of the BITS database, manages the system, helps with data entry, IT support, and reporting as well. So I'm going to provide some information on how we fund our urban grants. And we have actually, just to remind everyone, that we alternate years on when we fund planning versus our construction grant. So this year, so funding for 2024 will be our planning grant year, and our construction grants are funded this year in 2023. So we alternate when we have those available. Just to show you the planning grants, these are numbers from the 2022 allocations, because that was the last time we offered the planning grants. And they are funded with state segregated funds. And they can be they need to be in urban areas and for planning activities. Our urban construction grants are funded with state bond revenue. So in 2023, we funded a little over $2 million of projects in urban areas for structural practices, force account, and some for property acquisition. Additionally, DNR's Clean Water Fund Loan Program received funding from the U.S. EPA Sewer Overflow and Stormwater Reuse Municipal Grants Program. So DNR awarded these funds to eligible urban construction grant applicants. And with this additional funding, which was a little over $1 million, we were able to fund 3 urban construction projects at 100%. And the focus of these were rural communities, green infrastructure, and disadvantaged communities. So here is an example grant timeline for this year. January 13th, we posted our applications. Typically we do in January 15th, however, that was a weekend, so we put them up the Friday prior to that. Today is our grant application webinar day, which we try to do in mid-February. The applications are due on April 17th this year. They are usually due April 15th, but that is a weekend, so we have it the following Monday. Then between April and July, we do screening, scoring, and ranking. The first Tuesday in August, we go to the Land and Water Conservation Board meeting, where we share our ranked lists, our draft funding lines, and the preliminary allocation plan that we have with DADCAP. However, because this year is a budget year, we may not have our budget available in August. And if that's the case, we will go to the October meeting with our preliminary ranked lists and allocation plans. If by August we have our budget ready, then our final ranked lists and allocation plans will be shared in October at the Land and Water Conservation Board meeting. If we have to wait till October to go to the preliminary information, then we will go to the December Land and Water Conservation Board meeting to share our final. And then we hope to provide our grant awards in November and December of 2023. So I'm going to pause here to see if we have any questions.
All right, thanks, Joanna. I'm not seeing any questions right now, but just as a reminder, please use the chat feature to send any questions to the Q&A monitor, who's Karine. And if you have any questions about any of the previous sections, we can always circle back at any of these stopping points.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk about and give you kind of an overview of our urban planning grant program. And in the overview, I'll talk about eligible applicants, urban area, project purpose, eligible activities, and the maximum reward and reimbursement. Only governmental units are eligible applicants. So a governmental unit is what you see on the slide here: county, city, village, town, sewerage district, town sanitary districts, lake districts, regional planning commission, drainage districts, school districts, and for these grants, UW Board of Regents. The campus needs to meet certain conditions if UW Board of Regents is interested. So reach out if you have any questions on that. So as I mentioned, urban planning grants are only eligible if the project is in an existing urban area. So what do we mean by that? An urban area is defined by 281.66 Wisconsin stats and NR 155.1231. And this means an area that's comprised of one or more of the following: an area with the population density of 1,000 or more per square mile, or an area of industrial commercial land uses, and or an area of island parcels of land that are completely surrounded by urban land covers. Also, our planning grants need to be existing urban. So this means they need to be in existence on October 1st, 2004. They have to have been in existence prior to that, or that they are expected to become urban within 20 years. So I'm going to talk a little more detail about our definition of urban. So an area with a population density of 1,000 or more persons applies to residential areas. The population density must correlate to the project area. And if the project area only covers part of the governmental unit, then the density calculation should be based on the population and area within the project area boundary. So here are a few commonly asked questions. What is acceptable evidence that an area will become urban within the next 20 years? And a locally approved land use plan is acceptable evidence for that. What if only part of the municipality is an eligible urban project area? So you could eliminate the non-urban area from the project area, or you could prorate the eligible costs based on the amount of urban versus non-urban in the project area. And what if the plan evaluates BMPs or potential BMPs in an urban area, but with this substantial non-urban upstream drainage? So if the BMP drainage area is greater than 50% urban, or it will be 50% urban within the next 20 years, or if the volume of runoff treated is greater than 50% urban, then all costs are eligible. If these are less than 50%, then we need to prorate the cost based on the amount of urban versus non-urban drainage area or the volume of runoff treated. So I'm going to go into a little example here. In this slide, let's say that the black boundary shows the limits of a municipality. The blue line is a river running through the municipality. This red line is the area of draining to the segment of river within the municipal limits. This hatched area within the municipality is mapped as urban by the federal census and covered by a WPDS permit. The other areas have been annexed, but are still in agricultural land use. The community is developing a stormwater quality management plan to meet developed urban area standard in urbanized area. So let's say as part of the plan, the community is evaluating a BMP in location 1 here in the green. And the drainage area is outlined in purple. Will the grant fully reimburse evaluation of this BMP as part of the plan? And the answer is yes, because more than 50% of the drainage area is urban. So now let's say the community wants to evaluate a BMP 2 with the drainage area here outlined in purple. Will the grant fully reimburse the evaluation of this BMP? And it really depends. First, does the community have evidence that the upstream drainage area within the municipal limits will be urban within the next 20 years? And if yes, then greater than 50% and it's fully reimbursable. But let's say no, then what percent of runoff treated by the BMP is urban? Is the proposed BMP being sized or designed to route all or some of the upstream area around the BMP, so the majority of the runoff treated is urban? If yes, then it's fully eligible. If no to all of these, the BMP can still be evaluated, but it must be prorated for the urban versus non-urban. And why do we have this limitation? Statute limits DNR to only reimbursing urban area planning under this grant. And there have been confusion with this in the past. For example, there have been instances where a community identifies areas within their boundaries that meets the definition of urban, applies for a grant to address these areas, but they end up with a plan that covers the entire municipality plus large upstream ag areas. And then we are not able to fully reimburse 50% of their planning. Sometimes a community meets the definition of urban, develops a plan covering not only their community, but the entire watershed, HUC 12, and multiple upstream HUC 12s that are mostly agricultural. And this also does not meet the requirement unless the grantee has evidence that these areas will be urban in the next 20 years. So I'm going to take another break before I go on to the next section. Are there any questions?
No questions at this time, Joanna. But we would like to just take a moment here. My coworker, Dan, if you could just launch the poll. I think we have everyone who's going to be in attendance. This is just a quick poll for our extension reporting, a demographic poll. So we could just take a quick pause here for folks to fill this out. All right, we'll give it just another 10 seconds or so here. All right, Joanna, you can continue going. Thank you for doing that.
All right. I am having trouble getting to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So there are 4 different types of planning projects. MS4 compliance. So this means that the project's primary purpose is to achieve compliance with one or more elements of the applicant's MS4 municipal stormwater permit. So selecting this option does not preclude the inclusion of planning activities that are not directly related to MS4 permit compliance. Just keep that in mind as well. The second type is voluntary municipal stormwater permit compliance activities. This means that the project's primary purpose is for non-MS4, so a governmental unit that's not covered by a municipal stormwater permit, to voluntarily undertake one or more of the municipal stormwater permit requirements from NR 216.07. Number 3C is information and education, and this project's purpose is to develop or implement a comprehensive stormwater information and education program. And the last one is other eligible planning activities. This project's primary purpose is for eligible planning activities that are not directly related to MS4 permit compliance and they're not the information and education activities. And so the eligible activities that come up in your application are really dependent on what you've selected here as your project purpose. So I'm going to go through all of the different types of activities using kind of larger categories, and you'll see the categories throughout the grant process. So the first category of eligible activities are urban stormwater and erosion plans. And these include stormwater quality management plan, which is usually the most expensive activity in planning grants because it requires land use inventory, modeling of no controls, pollutant load, inventory of existing BMPs, and modeling of existing conditions, pollutant load, and requires the inventory and evaluation of opportunities, including building models that evaluate hypothetical alternatives for reducing pollution load, and then using this information to develop a plan to reduce pollutant load. We also have storm sewer system map in this category. The planning and development of local programs for urban runoff control also fits into this category. Some examples of local programs might be post-construction site stormwater management, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site erosion control, or education and outreach. Some of these items are also types of ordinances, and this is because program developing is different than ordinance developing. So the ordinance establishes the legal authority, and the plan is a detail of how that authority will be implemented. So for example, program plan would include specific details such as outfall inspection, schedule and testing methods, spill response procedures, etc. And the program plan complements the ordinance. And lastly, in this category is developing a municipal pollution prevention plan, or SWPPP, which may include some or all of the following elements. The SWPP for municipal facilities, leaf and yard waste management procedures, municipal BMP inspection and maintenance procedures, street sweeping procedures, catch basin cleaning procedures, and winter road maintenance procedures. The next category is urban stormwater utility formation, and this includes an evaluation of alternatives for local financing of urban runoff control program, which is not the same thing as including BMP cost estimate in a local stormwater plan with a recommendation to apply for DNR grants. Rather, this is evaluating of alternatives for development of a dedicated revenue source for water quality management program. It includes the cost of overall water quality program, including administration and maintenance, and not just capital projects. And it must include a financial evaluation of these alternatives, as opposed to a recommendation to apply for DNR grants or a statement that options were discussed. The second eligible activity in this category is related to the previous one of evaluating the feasibility of implementing a stormwater utility or other dedicated revenue source. But this activity would reimburse for costs associated with the initial establishment of implementing a utility or other dedicated revenue source. To be eligible to request cost share funding for this activity, applicants must have already completed a feasibility study of the dedicated funding mechanism, and the local municipal board or council must have recommended development and implementation of the dedicated funding mechanism to be developed and implemented. The next category is information and education, and this includes information and education plan development and information and education implementation. The implementation activity reimburses costs associated with the implementation of an urban runoff control program, specifically public I&E program implementation. For most activities under an urban planning grant, DNR cannot implement, or it's not for the implementation of specific BMPs. However, this one is an implementation activity that can be funded. The next category is ordinances. There are several types of ordinances that are part of the MS4 permit, such as post-construction stormwater management ordinance, erosion control ordinance, and illicit discharge ordinance. Another type of ordinance that falls in this category is a low impact development ordinance. It's an approach to land development that manages stormwater as close to its source as possible in order to mimic natural processes that result in infiltration, evapotranspiration, or the use of stormwater in order to protect water quality. And then we also have other ordinances impacting the quality of runoff from urban areas, and those would need to be described in detail and justified. The last category is for other eligible planning activities. If this is selected, the activity needs to be described and the final deliverable will need to be listed. Please discuss these activities in the pre-application discussion with the regional Nonpoint source coordinator to make sure they are eligible. So the Urban Planning Grant is a reimbursement grant program. The DNR does not pay the money up front, but rather reimburses 50% of the money spent. The maximum grant award is $85,000. The grant period is for 2 years, and grantees may ask for a 1-year extension, but you should not apply for, you should be applying for the grant period, which is 2 years. So we'll talk a little bit about reimbursement. Reimbursement means that no money is reimbursed until the grantee has incurred expenses and made progress towards the development of planning deliverables. So we'll walk through the steps. So step 1, DNR issues a grant award. Then the grantee submits a professional service agreement or PSA to DNR for approval. The DNR issues the PSA approval. And this is an opportunity for DNR to help the grantee evaluate whether the consultant proposed scope meets the requirements. And this happens before agreements are executed and the grantee begins incurring costs under those agreements. Then the grantee completes a draft of the planning deliverables and submits the draft planning deliverables to the DNR for review and approval. After the DNR reviews and comments on the draft deliverables, the grantee develops a final deliverables that meets DNR requirements. The grantee then pays a contractor and requests reimbursement from the DNR. The DNR then reimburses the grantee up to the state share amount, which might be up to 50%, and then the grantee receives the reimbursement. One unique thing to urban planning grants is you can request a partial reimbursement for deliverables in progress. So by contrast, in an urban construction grant, you cannot request partial reimbursement. Construction project grantees can only request reimbursement of fully installed BMPs. So the urban planning grant program still requires accountability for these partial reimbursement requests. First, a progress report documenting the progress for which the reimbursement is required with the RFR. The progress report must explain what work has been done on what deliverables. Second, only 50% of the amount eligible for reimbursement can be reimbursed for partial reimbursement. So if the cost share rate is 50%, then only 25% of the amount spent can be reimbursed at this time. And third, grantees are required to pay back any partial reimbursement if they don't complete the final approved deliverable within the grant period. So grantees cannot keep partial reimbursement for deliverables that are not complete or that aren't approved. So when grantees hire a consultant to develop deliverables, and those deliverables are submitted to the DNR, some cases, the grantee has made a final payment to the consultant and closed the contract. The grantee might have difficulty addressing the comments with internal staff. So as you're developing your scope of work in the project budget, anticipate what the consultant will need to develop for both the draft and final version of the deliverables for the DNR, and work this into your project schedule and budget. So let's go over a couple potential questions related to reimbursement. So the first question is, what is the difference between eligible planning activities and expenses eligible for cost sharing? So this slide shows an example of a project budget, which includes eligible planning activities. And here we have listed map and inventory and existing condition modeling, etc. The total cost of these activities is $94,650. So you see that circled on the bottom left column B. This does not equal the amount eligible for cost sharing, which is right in column C, which is $63,100. So why would these not be the same? The one possibility is the portion of the planning area does not meet the definition of urban development. So only the urban areas of the BMP watershed is eligible for cost sharing. Another possibility is that it is evaluating both water quality and flood control. So only the water quality portion of the plan is eligible for cost sharing. And again, the total cost should be prorated accordingly to determine the eligible project costs. In this example, 2/3 of the planning area meets the urban definition, 1/3 doesn't. So 2/3 of the total project cost is eligible for reimbursement. So you can see the difference between column B and C, which is estimated total cost, and column C, which is the amount eligible for cost sharing. So another question is, what is the difference between the amount of eligible expenses and the amount of reimbursement? So the maximum amount, the grant amount, is 50% of the amount eligible for cost sharing, up to a maximum grant award of $85,000. So in this case, the maximum grant award is 50% of the $63,100, which is eligible for cost sharing, which is $31,550. So you can see from this slide that the application automatically calculates the maximum award based on the amount eligible for cost sharing. So the amount eligible for cost sharing is not necessarily the same as the grant amount or the amount of reimbursement. So to review, the total project cost here is $94,650. The amount eligible for cost sharing is $63,100, and the grant award is 50% of that amount, which is $31,550. So what is the local state share? So in this example, based on total project cost, the requested state share amount is the maximum state share amount, and the local share is the difference between the total project costs and the grant award. So 94,650 minus 31,550 equals 63,100. So the amount eligible for cost sharing is not the grant amount. So I'm going to pause now for any questions.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions that have come in.
All right.
The first one, are there changes to how the federal census urban area will be identified?
There are changes to that, but it doesn't really change how we define this in our grants at this time, because our definition of urban is what I shared before, which is the most used case is the 1,000 persons per square mile. Corinne, do you have anything to add to that?
No, you hit the nail on the head. I wanted to make sure by offering this question up to the larger group that they did understand exactly what you just said, that yes, there are changes to the federal census definition of urban, but the definition of urban that is in NR 155 and in statute for the urban grant program is the one that still stands in terms of eligibility. So I'm just reiterating what you just said, Joanna. So that's great.
Okay, great.
Great. Second question here. The PSA between the Wisconsin DNR and the city, does this get approved or signed after the notice of award is given? Does this require a formal resolution by city council?
And I can help with this one, Joanna.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
The PSA typically, yes, gets approved after the grant is awarded. So we like to see the grant get awarded and signed, and then moving forward with that PSA approval. Whether or not it needs a formal resolution by the city is between the consultant and the city. I can't speak on behalf of all the cities across the state. But that formal resolution is not something that we require, but the city itself may require.
Great, thank you. That is all the questions we have right now. So Joanna, I'll hand it back to you.
All right, thank you. All right, so now I'm going to go through application information and requirements. I get frequent questions about how things are scored. I'm going to give a little summary here on some broad topics of how we score our grants, but really the most information will be in your application instruction document. It will go over all of the details of each competitive scoring criteria. So there are some scoring sections that are based on location of the project. Water quality need is one of the highest scoring components, and impaired waters receive the most points. Within the impaired water quality category, TMDLs receive the highest score. And because a TMDL analysis provides additional information and helps target implementation. So the application places equal importance on groundwater and surface water. Because the water quality need components are based on project location, applicants don't have the ability to modify these scores. We also provide bonus points if the grant project is within a public drinking water supply area. So more points are awarded if the grantee is a municipality or a county that enforces ordinances relevant to the project. More points are awarded if there's been prior work, such as inventory and targeting. It's important to have a detailed project budget and schedule and to build local support for the project ahead of the application. Definitely include as much relevant detail as possible and answer the questions completely. So some scores may increase or decrease based on how the questions were answered. Some questions on the application forms require a narrative response and are more qualitative. So in those cases, scores are based on the following. Was a question answered? To what extent was it answered? How much detail was provided? Were all components addressed? And was the answer clear? So our instructions have, as I said, much information in there. Each page has a header that indicates the part and the question of the application covered on that page. The instructions are also divided into columns. So the directions are on the left side and an explanation of those directions are on the right side. So now we also, which I will talk about later as well, require the application to be sent in electronically. As part of the grant process, it's required that the grantee identify and establish an authorized responsible government official, which is an ARGO. The ARGO is the only person that will be able to sign and submit grant agreements, amendment requests, reimbursement claims on behalf of the grantee. So make sure that the person authorized by the grantee is the person who will be doing this. An executed government responsibility resolution, or a GRR, is required to establish this ARGO. We recommend using a job title rather than the name in the authorizing resolution, so that if there's turnover, staff turnover, you don't need to create a new or execute a new GRR. You can use the same one. This shows the GRR template, which is available in our instructions document. The GRR must include the language in the red box. You don't need to, if you want to use your own format, that is fine, but please make sure the content is included in that document. As I mentioned on the roles screen slide, the contacting the non-point source, regional non-point source coordinator is a requirement for the application. So contact them early in the process. Make sure to discuss project eligibility, whether you're an eligible applicant, the extent of the urban project area, eligibility of the proposed planning activities. Discuss any prorating if it needs to happen. What are the proposed practices? Any permits, water quality need, and water quality monitoring, which I don't think will be used in these grants, so that you can ignore that piece. So I often get questions about which grant application should I use for this type of project. So I'm going to list some questions here to think about when you're beginning your grant application process. And these will help you and your regional non-point source coordinator figure out if you're applying for the appropriate grant and if your project is eligible. Are you trying to address a non-point source pollution or stormwater runoff problem? Is this an urban area? Is it existing urban or new development? Which BMPs do you have planned? Is it in a TMDL? And how do you plan to meet TMDL goals in the project? Are you a local unit of government? What is the water quality need? Are you trying to meet your WPDS permit requirement? And do you have jurisdiction over the project area or an intergovernmental agreement? And now I will pause again for any questions.
Joanna, I wanted to go back and revisit that last question that we got if we could. Just to make sure that there's no confusion. The question had asked if there's a PSA between DNR and the city. We don't actually have PSAs between the grantee and the grantor. The PSA is actually between the city and the consultant. And there is a pre-approval that is done by DNR of those professional service agreements. So just know that is the situation. So there's a grant agreement between the DNR and the municipality, and then the municipality enters into that professional service agreement with a consultant, and we need to get that pre-approved. So again, any kind of formal resolution needed by the city to enter into that PSA with their consultant, that is not a requirement of the DNR. That would be a decision to be made by the city.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Corinne. There are no other questions at the moment right now, Joanna.
All right, I will go on to the last topic here, which is what is new in this grant cycle? So any minor errors that were discovered in the last grant cycle were corrected. We every year go through and make sure that the scoring criteria make sense, and so did the questions. So there were some clarifications to those areas as well. We are requiring electronic submission. Those directions are in our instructions, and if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to me at any time. We added a note regarding referencing long documents. We want to make sure that if you are referencing any long document, that you summarize it and with some page numbers cited so that that can be scored appropriately. We are not going to ask our scoring team to read through an entire document. We want to know where to go in the document if it's referenced. We also made a change in the GRR template for the authorized representative. We removed the requirement for the authorized representative to sign and submit interim and final reports. And we made this change to accommodate the switch from the paper final report forms to an electronic data system, which I talked about earlier, BITS or BMP implementation tracking system. And we want the ability for other people other than the authorized representative to be able to enter those final reports in the data system. And the last thing that is new is is our disadvantaged community bonus point section. Environmental justice is a national and state priority. The Watershed Management Bureau has had the opportunity to incorporate environmental justice into the TRIM grant program by providing points to applicants if the community affected by the grant project is disadvantaged and if the project benefits this community. So ideally, this will spread out our limited grant dollars and work towards a goal that all people receive benefits of a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, regardless of race, national origin, or income. So how are we doing this? For our planning grants, the applicant will be asked to list the town, villages, or cities where the project is located, or a list of all communities within the project area. The applicant will then explain how the project benefits the community where it's located or the communities within the project area. If it's more than one community, the department will calculate an area weighted average disadvantaged community index for the listed towns, villages, or cities after the application has been submitted to determine if the project qualifies for the bonus points. The index is calculated using the methodology detailed in the Clean Water Fund Program Intended Use Plan. The index includes factors such as population, median household, income, family poverty percentage, population trend, unemployment rate, lowest quintile household income. A community can benefit from a project in many ways. For example, how was the community involved in the decision of where to locate the practice? In addition to water quality improvement, what other ancillary benefits will the practice bring to the community? So we will add 5 bonus points to the score if the disadvantaged community index is greater or equal to 110, and the applicant explains how the project is a benefit to the disadvantaged community. And that's all I have today, unless there are any other questions.
No, we're not getting any other questions right now. I guess we'll wait and see if there's anything that anyone else wants to ask. Just thank you again, Joanna, for this great presentation. Thank you to Dan and Corrine for helping behind the scenes. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much.